But the Christian Vikings experienced resistance from their pagan tribesmen to give up their ancient gods.
The kings began to go for Christianity because it helped them. It helped them consolidate power. And they began to impose it on these people. And there was a lot of struggle. The people didn't like it. They didn't want to give up their old ways. They were afraid of giving up their old ways.
There were some Christian missionaries that came on the island and went around and converted a few. But there were a lot of skeptics. And at one certain occasion, they decided that they were going to go into a test against the pagan deities and the representative of pagan deities, which was known as a berserker, a man who was a little crazy, to put it nicely. And so these Christian missionaries challenged him. Said, we'll build a fire, and you pagans build a fire. If the berserker passes through your fire but can't pass through ours, then we know Christianity is won. If he can't pass through yours, then we know paganism is won. It's almost like an Old Testament duel. Well, the story says that the Viking berserker came in, passed easily over the fire that was made by the pagans, but could not penetrate the fire that was made by Christians. And thus everyone around saw that Christianity was the right religion and thus joined.
Back in Norway, the great catalyst for Viking unity emerged in the destiny of one young boy. Harald Hardrada was the half-brother of Norway's King Olaf and his heir apparent. He was just 15 years old, fighting on the losing side of a Viking civil war. But Harald returned to extract his revenge and wrote his own history in the blood of his enemies. The Vikings spread like a murderous plague across Europe. The first to fall were unarmed monasteries, but soon the invaders took terror deeper into the continent. Eventually, the Vikings turned upon themselves. Norway was locked in civil war. In 1030, the Battle of Stiklestad pitted forces loyal to current Danish ruler Knut the Great against Norwegian King Olaf. From the ashes of the infighting, a young warrior had risen. Harald Hardrada, King Olaf's half-brother and heir. In the middle of the 11th century, as Harald grew to manhood, he developed the ambition to lead and unite Norway. But first, he had to win the power to do so.
Harald was an interesting character. He begins his Viking regime, if you will, when he's a young man. At 16, he's wounded in a battle that will eventually take his royal brother's life, and he is forced to flee.
Harald Hardrada faced exile in the faraway northern lands. He headed to Sweden, and then eventually to Kiev, a thriving trading city in what is now the Ukraine. In 1031, he followed the route of the Swedish Vikings, who had established trading centers during the previous 2 centuries to access exotic eastern goods. The Swedes came as violent raiders, but stayed to become traders. Through trade, Kiev connected the Norse world with the wider world of the East.
When they find coin hoards of this period, the coins are from all over the world. And they found like little statues of Buddha in the ruins of Hedeby. And these were the connections of these people. They're far more important because of this than because of the bash 'em smash 'em stuff.
Harald realized that without a market for his plunder, his power was limited.
The Vikings had lived on trade for hundreds of years. When you go out there and you trash a monastery and you grab a bunch of cups and some manuscripts, you're not going to take them home. You know, what use are they to you? You have to go someplace and swap them for what you really want.
But material goods made up only part of the trading. The Vikings also dealt in men. As slave masters, they traded the men and women captured in their raiding parties.
Women died in those days at an appalling rate in childbirth, so you had a constant resupply with women, and they would seize the girls and carry them off and undoubtedly rape them and then take them to slave pens and sell them off.
But despite Kiev's economic lessons, Harold had not come this far to seek his fortune in the marketplace. He must also assume the mantle of a warrior and learn the skills that would make him a king. By the year 1038, Harold had grown confident and hungry for plunder, leading an elite force of Viking mercenaries. He fought on behalf of foreign rulers across the east, winning wealth and power as he prepared to return to Norway and seize the crown. In Sicily, Harold demonstrated his legendary resourcefulness.
Harold's generalship is characterized not necessarily by great courage, but by great slyness. And this is a major Viking virtue, is rather than go and just bash people over the head, if you can be sneaky, they prefer that. One of his tactics was they came to a city and they besieged the city, and he had his men capture the little birds that were flying in and out of the city. And with pitch and string, they attached little burning twigs to the backs of the birds and let them go. The birds flew back into the city to their nests in the thatch and immediately started the city on fire, so they took the city.
In King Harold's saga, 13th century Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson told of the plan's effectiveness in conquering Sicily. At that, all the people came out of the town begging for mercy, he writes. The very same people who had been shouting defiant insults at the army and its leader for days on end. Harold spared the lives of all those who begged for quarter and took control of the town. After nearly 15 years, the cunning Harold had amassed the reputation and wealth he needed to at last lay rightful claim to his fractured native lands. In 1046, he headed back to Scandinavia, a famous mercenary with the riches and ambition of a king, but without a title. As next in the line for the throne of Norway, he was ready to stake his claim.
Problem is his nephew's on the throne now. And so in order to reclaim it, he has to do a little dealing. All right, what do? He's a pretty politically astute individual, and so, of course, he makes a deal with his nephew that they can co-rule the throne. That works. Nephew dies in a year. We don't have anything to suggest that Harold puts him to death, although there are certainly accusations that are thrown in this direction. Harold doesn't deny them. And ultimately, Harold is now back in charge of Norway.
With Harold's claim to the throne completed, he moved to assure his power remained unchallenged. In 1047, he set out to obliterate his adversaries. In a brutal mixture of tactics and vengeance, Harold unleashed an unholy fury against all who opposed him. In 1047 AD, after years of gaining power, Harald Hardrada became king of Norway. He ruled the Vikings through sheer force. Harold's men were merciless as they lay waste to the farms and villages of those who opposed him. Their message was simple: submit or die. Across the country, Harold's enemies paid the ultimate price for their disloyalty. In King Harold's saga, The king celebrated his insatiable cruelty in his own words. I kill without compunction, and remember all my killings. Treason must be scotched by fair means or foul before it overwhelms me. The oak trees of insurrection grow from the acorns of treachery. With the insurrection crushed, a celebration was in order. King Harold's faithful supporters filled his longhouse for a lavish celebration.
If you had a lot of money, if you had lots of gold, you were a very big he in the Vikings because you gave it away to people. This was how they accumulated their armies.